What's up, sons? It's Blind Run, the son of a tech, and today I have the EVGA GTX 1060 for the Win Edition, or as it's labeled, FTW, which I think we can determine is for the win. So here's the card. It's the EVGA GTX 1060 for the win, like stated before. And it's going to come at a pretty high premium of $319 in the US. Whereas the regular base reference GTX 1060s, I don't know if you call them reference, but the retail ones are going to run you around $250. For example, the Zotac Mini that is also reviewed on this channel. So we really need to sit down and take a look at what makes this card different and determine if the difference is worth the difference in price. Now, if you're in another country, I don't know what those prices are going to be, but it's safe to assume that you're still going to be paying some sort of premium for the Win edition over another model. The For the Win comes with an ACX 3.0 cooler. And it's in black, which looks really good. I do like that. And it has 0 decibel fan technology, which is essentially that the fan's not going to spin up while you're just doing desktop tasks or something like that. Or even if it's just light gaming, in my experience. On this card, the cooling is fantastic. Throughout the benchmarking tests, it only ever hit 64 degrees Celsius max temp, and that was on the stock fan profile. And GPU-Z over the all the entire test showed that the max fan speed was 400 RPMs at about 5% usage. So whatever they did there, or if I got a super special one, I'm not positive, but that's amazing, especially when you consider the fact that I did turn the power limit up to 120%. So to get the power to the card, there is a single 8-pin adapter that sports a 6+1 power phase. That is a huge bump over the standard editions, which is a 3+1 power phase. If that translates into better overclocking, I'm not sure. Let's talk about that for a second. There's a 2037 megahertz boost clock without even touching any overclocking utilities when I plug this card in. I was pretty impressed with that. That's one of the highest out of the 10 series I've seen so far. And this thing actually overclocks pretty damn well too. And it was hitting 2113 megahertz overclocked, and that was stable across all the games that are tested. You will see here in a second. During the overclock, the kilowatt showed a max system power draw of 217 watts. Now, I have explained before that I have run the system without the graphics card in and run Cinebench, and the max power draw period from that is 95 watts if I'm just doing a test on the CPU. So we can determine from that relatively that there's about 123 watts of power draw coming from the graphics card. Now, it might be a little less or a little more, but that's the best way I have it testing right now. If you guys can provide me with a better way, leave it in the comment section below. The card supports 3 DisplayPort 1.4 ports, a single HDMI 2.0B port, and a single DVI, which is awesome. It supports 6 gigabytes of GDDR5, which is pretty standard, at a mem clock of 8,000. There is no backplate on the card, which is a pretty big disappointment when you're talking about spending $70 more on this card than you would have to on some of its competitors, or even just a cheaper version within the EVGA line. I was kind of hoping that we would at least see one, just because you're paying so much extra. I don't feel like it's that much more money to go ahead and put a backplate on there, and I don't know where the extra value comes out of for the rest of the features on the card. So let's talk numbers. I've decided to kind of rework some of my benchmarking, and I use PresentMon for most of it. You guys can check out a couple videos on this channel. I'll link a description below. My Forza video talks about all of the formulas I use. I'll leave the formulas that I use in Excel to figure out the numbers down there with you guys. And we're going to go ahead and start with synthetic benchmarks. So in TimeSpy, which I'm using default settings, it scored a graphics score of 4,382. In Firestrike, with default settings, it scored 13,491. So that's where we're at. If you guys need to check out and see what your cards are doing, that should be pretty basic. You're just going to open your 3D Mark and run those at default settings, and you can compare to this particular card. All of these benchmarks are in 1080p, other than these two. Firestrike's in 1080p, but TimeSpy is in 1440p. So moving on, we have Gears of War Ultimate Edition. All the settings are maxed out, and we have 4K textures on. That doesn't mean we're actually in 4K resolution. There's an option to just turn 4K textures on. In this title, the EVGA GTX for the win got a min of 70 frames per second, an average of 122.1 frames per second, and a max of 165 frames per second. In Rise of the Tomb Raider on very high preset with SSAO times 4, the EVGA GTX struggled. EVGA GTX. The EVGA GTX 1060 for the win struggled with a min frame rate of 13.36, an average of 39.36, and a max of 81.18. Now, of course, turn off SSAO and you're probably going to be fine, but I like to push the cards as far as we can, at least in a couple of them. For Forza Horizon 3, I didn't practice this. I went ahead and used the dynamic preset, and I used medium settings just because I have a baseline for that, and I was curious how this matched up to the RX 470 and the GTX 1060 3GB. The min frame rate was 31 frames per second with an average of 61.15 and a max of 87.4. Now, to give you guys an idea, that is actually pretty disappointing for this game, because the RX 470, which is $120 cheaper, had a min frame rate of 33.95 frames per second, an average of 74 frames per second, and a max of 107 frames per second, completely kind of stomping on Nvidia at this point. So if you guys are looking along the lines of DirectX 12, UWP games, so on and so forth, and you're not really thinking you're going to be playing a lot of DirectX 11 games, you might want to just go ahead and save yourself some money and spring a couple $100 for an RX 470, especially if you're playing in 1080p. And I don't think that the GTX 1060 is quite a 1440p or higher resolution card yet. In Total War Warhammer, with the Ultra preset, the EVGA GTX 1060 for the win, there we go, had a minimum frame rate of 73 frames per second, an average of 77.4, and a max of 80 frames per second. And finally, one of the latest games, and one I'm having a lot of fun playing personally, and I do play this on my Titan in 4K. Just want to clarify before you start calling me an AMD fanboy over here. Deus Ex Mankind Divided on the Ultra preset got a min of 31.7 frames per second, an average of 39.4 frames per second, and a max of 48.5 frames per second. There is no ambient occlusion run here, and there's no anti-aliasing run here, just the Ultra preset. And yeah, it's a very demanding game. At this point, it's kind of a bummer, and you're gonna need to, even with a $300 plus graphics card, turn some settings down. In conclusion, on the EVGA GTX 1060 for the win, I don't personally think that it's worth the $70. More than, for example, the Zotac 1060 Mini that I've reviewed on this channel. In fact, like, it's right within a couple frames when you start talking about real world performance. Even like I've seen like a couple of the games, Tomb Raider, for example, I think we had an average of 39.36 frames per second on the For the Win edition, and the Zotac was like a average of 40 frames per second. So it even kind of beat it out in that situation. So I'm not sure that having the extra overclocking is improving anything at this point in real world gaming performance. Now, of course, it does beat it out in synthetic tests like TimeSpy and Firestrike. So if you're going for bragging rights, I understand, but I feel like if you're going for bragging rights, you're probably going to want to also bump up the cost of the GPU. So save yourself some money, grab yourself maybe a GTX 1060 6GB that's around the $250 to $270 or $80 price point. In the US, of course, is what I'm referring to. I will see you next Tuesday.